The Blues of Picasso. Pablo Picasso, a well-known artist of the 20th century, notably known as the father of Cubism, Picasso is also well known for his Blue period. The Blue period has been the most successful of Picasso's color-themed periods. The Blue period is, as the name itself suggests, the period when Picasso created a series of paintings all made in the blue hue. It relies heavily on cool tones to express the numbing emotions which surround the feelings of death and the ensuing miseries which accompany its presence. The Blue period is centered around emotion, particularly loss, and reflects the process by which a human comes to understand mortality and the tragedy which is a life lost, and coping the unfairness dealt by life. Picasso's Blue period connects his audience both to his despair and to the despairs which they might have themselves experienced. His work transcends reality to bring his audience into his depression and melancholy of life. His particular period has been so successful due to Picasso's use of color, style, and the choice of subjects to portray his emotions concerning his loss and tragedy in his paintings that resonate with everyone. Picasso had lived a rather difficult life. Early on, just barely a young man, he lost his sister Conchita in 1895. This, of course, deeply affected Picasso's life, sending him into a state of depression. Unfortunately, death and loss seems to have lingered with Picasso, as only a few years after his sister's tragic death, his friend committed suicide. The death of his friend Carlos Casagemas only furthered his depression, sending him down the spiraling rabbit hole of loneliness, melancholy, and bittersweet sadness. Picasso himself once recalled that it was upon the learning of his dear friend's death that he started painting in melochromatic blues in 1901. This particular tragic event resulted in a series of paintings between 1901 to 1904 in various shades of greens and blues. Picasso's use of these colors created a sense of sadness and longing. These paintings in this period seems to reflect Picasso's experience with loss and poverty, with many of his subjects being prostitutes, drunks, blind beggars of Barcelona, and various depictions of Picasso's late friend Carlos and his unfortunate demise. Death is something everyone has to deal with, whether it be the death of a loved one or coming to terms with one's own mortality. It is something no one can escape from, and everyone can sympathize with. Picasso's Casagemas in his coffin depicts Picasso's friend Carlos after his suicide. Carlos clearly meant a lot to Picasso, and his death affected him deeply, as seen with the multiple paintings surrounding his death and melancholic scenes surrounding the tragic loss. The brushstrokes in this particular painting closely resembles the style of Vincent van Gogh. The style helps create an almost dream-like effect, showing the feeling of Picasso's disbelief at this terrible loss. The color palette of blues and greens create a scene that is cold and almost devoid of life. This palette will continue to be used for a few more years as Picasso is trying to come to terms with death and hardships dealt to him in his life. Although the colors create a scene that's almost as cold as death, the calmness portrayed on Carlos's face is not unlike one who is but asleep and may wake up at any moment. The sullen peacefulness, the disbelief that someone so close could have taken his own life is something people who have lost a dear loved one are able to grasp onto, understand, and sympathize with. The painting Evocation depicts a scene of the burial of his late friend The style of brushstroke is noticeably different than that of Cascamus in his coffin, for it is of a much softer style and technique. Carlos, being the focal point of the painting, is wrapped up in a white cloth, which is a drastic color choice that separates him from the rest of the painting around him. With life having left him, he is now free of the world, separate from the colors of the world around him. The figures in mourning surrounding the body of Carlos are clad in blue. This particular way of dress represents Picasso's deep sadness over Carlos's death. The green of the earth swirls as it meets the soft blue hues of the heavens. One may have noticed that the heaven of Carlos is rather strange, as there seems to be nude women lounging around. There seem to be prostitutes. One is even seen kissing Carlos' soul as he's riding into heaven on a white horse. This may be a remembrance of his life as he embellished in the flesh and took comfort in the arms of woman. Or it may be a depiction of what Picasso wishes for Carlos in the afterlife. As in life, his love was unrequited by a woman he had fallen deeply for, and in the heaven Picasso had painted for him, no woman will turn him away. He will be comforted and have his love finally returned to him in the afterlife. Either way, it is a rather sweet painting in remembrance of his dear friend. The strange heavenly scene above the mourners truly shows that Picasso is trying to cope and come to terms with loss and death. Pain and loss not comes only from death alone, but also from the unfairness of society around you. The painting Old Blind Man with Boy depicts, just as the name entails, a blind man with a young boy. The man's clothes are small on him, and are seemingly covered with grime, with shades of green and spots of dark blue, and are noticeably well worn as they are torn. The boy who is wrapped in a blanket is eating bread. The viewer of this painting can assume that the subjects are poor, homeless, and hungry. The use of blue creates an aura of coldness and sadness, perhaps even a sense of hopelessness. And yet, despite the cold atmosphere, the painting also brings a sense of hope and love to the observer. The closeness of the boy and blind man seemingly shows a caring relationship, even a father and son relationship, with the old man's face looking down towards the boy. Even though the old blind man appears to be cold and is in the blue atmosphere with torn, ragged clothing that are noticeably too small for him and surely gives very little warmth, the young boy next to him is wrapped in a blanket with baggy clothes. And even though the old blind man is frail with sunken cheeks and a skinny frame with the skin just clinging onto bone, suggesting that the old man is starving, the young boy is being fed. Despite the old man's clear needs for warmth and food, he is putting the young boy's needs before his. For society failed to take care of this child, the old man is doing what he can to look after him. Picasso's The Blind Man's Meal shows a blind man sitting at a table holding bread in one hand, and the other hand is lightly feeling the water pitcher. Crumbs scattered on the table as a man holding his bread beside the plate rather than over it. The subject itself in this painting stirs such sad emotions, combined with the use of color palettes of the blue period, creates a really moving piece. There is a softness in the brushstrokes, almost a tenderness, as Picasso painted this. The man in this painting is not elderly. His hair is still dark, and his hands are that of someone in their 40s, maybe early 50s. Such youth with plenty of life yet to live, and yet his cheeks are slightly sunken in from hunger. The blind seems to have been a very common subject for many of Picasso's paintings. The Old Blind Guitarist is a very solemn painting depicting an old blind man playing his guitar in the streets of Barcelona. With his feet bare and his threadbare shirt torn, the observer of this painting may assume that this man is poor. The cold blue hue and the torn clothing creates a slight chill atmosphere that sends shivers down the observer's spine, as though they too were in this painting with the blind guitarist, listening to his silent melody, reminiscing of the days behind him. The subject of this painting is rather depressingly sweet. A blind man bent over as he plays melodies from his youth and experiences in his life on his guitar. The observer can only imagine what this old man has been through. The blue and green hues used accentuates the old man's sorrow. The blind man's ragged and bent frame at sharp angles gives him a rather dramatic appearance and shows that he has been beaten down by society around him, and he finds solace, a little bit of peace, in his guitar. His overall appearance shows that he has lived a long and difficult life, and yet he is still able to play and sing sweet melodies of the past. Why had Picasso taken to painting such subjects as the elderly who are poor and blind? Possibly because he sympathizes with them, being in poverty himself and having difficulty making ends meet, or because they have seen much more and experienced much more than he has. They not only lost their eyesight, but their jobs, homes, and may have also bore witness to the death of many loved ones. The old blind men portrayed in many of Picasso's paintings have seen so much in their youth and have been torn down by others, looked down upon by society, now living in the streets, now blind and poor. Their lives were harsh, and yet they have found the strength and will to continue living, to go on to the next day, hoping it will be better than the last. No matter how difficult their pasts were, they were able to carry on with their lives despite the hardships surely laid out before them. With subjects such as these, it's difficult, as an observer of these paintings, not to feel a twinge of sadness looking at Picasso's creations. Picasso's depression did not conclude at the end of the Blue Period, but rather it grew in shape and complexity as the future periods began. It is the purity of the Blue Period which gives it so much power. The use of the monochromatic colors matches the lack of alternating emotion. And rather than taking away from the art, it lends its power in its simplicity. Truly, the Blue Period, with its azure melancholy and sapphire despair, has been the period which has most strongly connected with the audience. The topics of tragic melancholy and graciously painted misery seems to hold a place of fascination in people's minds. And when those appealing schemes are paired with the topics of death and suffering, the ensuing art style is a true success. The sullen peacefulness of Picasso's artworks, the way they describe the melancholies of life, is something any viewer, regardless of age, lifestyle, experience is able to grasp onto, understand. Life is a beautiful, tragic, and painful thing to behold, and yet graceful in many ways, more than one. It is unfair in many aspects, and most of the time people will find that it's much easier to remember and hold on to the pain experienced in their lives rather than the joy. Pain, anger, sadness, all of it seems to have a stronger grip over the human mind, more so than the happy moments in life. And seeing that someone else, such as Picasso, had went through that same pain, if not even more so, and was able to create something so beautiful out of it, that does not necessarily bring about joy, but the comfort and the feeling that they, the observers, are not alone in their pain and suffering. And although his depression does indeed still show through his later works, none of them truly captures quite so elegantly the tragic emotion that they have been able to communicate with such melancholy to the viewers of his creations as those in Picasso's Blue Period.